Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick, and I'm from Coro, and I'm here today to introduce to you what I think is one of the best kept secrets in mining. That's our Marimaca copper oxide project in Chile. To achieve that, though, I think there's three things I need to convey first. Why copper, why Chile, and why exploration, the three keys to that secret. So starting with copper, it's clearly the most interesting metal right now, characterized, of course, by a looming supply deficit. Indeed, the BMO analyst last week said that he foresees a 400,000 ton deficit for that metal this year, and the forecast is that will grow wider into 2020. From a demand perspective, it's premised on three factors: population growth, urbanization, and electrification. And new applications too. We're hearing a lot today about the electronic vehicles, electronic revolution. And actually, I was looking at some of the slides that VRIC Cambridge House produced, and the one that got my attention was the four applications therein: electric motors, hardware, energy storage, distribution, and fuel. And if you look across that, copper is actually the only metal that's used in all four of those. So clearly copper is the prime metal for that. But on the demand side of the equation, you can see that supply is challenged, and that's something as miners that we know about. The industry is struggling to sustain production at existing assets, but the real challenge ahead is the lack of new supply. Declining grades, deeper projects, declining recoveries, increasing costs. Whatever the issue, the quality of brown and greenfields projects is deteriorating. There are some good resources out there, but what good is a good resource when it's a kilometer under a jungle? What the industry needs is better projects in better jurisdictions, better projects like Marimaca. With that in mind, let's turn to Chile and explain why I think Chile is the best country to be in. I'm fortunate to have worked around the world. I've worked at Glencore in Asia, in Africa, most recently for Avanco in Brazil. But I have to say that Chile is above and beyond the best place I've ever worked when it comes to copper mining. It's home to the largest resources, approximately 170,000 million tons, double second place Australia. It's home to the world's largest mine. Actually, it's home to 10 of the 20 largest mines in the world. But the statistic that always gets my attention is that in Chile, 20% of GDP is attributed to copper. And when you get to this level, it's not just about being important to the national economy, it actually gets into the DNA of Chile. The industrial infrastructure, the commercial infrastructure, a supportive government. Chile and copper are really synonymous. Finally, I want to explain why exploration. Here on the chart, we have the infamous mining investment life cycle, or the S-curve as we know it. And you can see here that the most value is made during the discovery, exploration, and project definition stages. That's the sweet spot for our Marimaca project. Yeah, okay, I get it, exploration is high risk, but I'm going to explain to you why I don't think that's the case for Marimaca. We've already made the discovery, our exploration is funded, so for us the story is just one of resource growth. So it's probably time now to take a look at Marimaca, and I'd like to do that with three steps: location, geology, and this growing resource. So on location, the first map, we're in the north of Chile, next to Antofagasta, the sort of de facto capital of copper. And if you move to the second, let's think about Chile in terms of geology. There are two main copper belts. The darker brown shading you see there is the coastal copper belt, which runs at lower altitudes. And then much further inland, you get to the Andean high altitude copper belt, where limited infrastructure is prevalent. That's not the case, however, for Marimaca. Located just inland from that Hammerhead Peninsula you can see there between Mejillones, an industrial port, and the capital of copper, Antofagasta. Actually, you're within a 25-kilometer radius of plug-and-play infrastructure. And by that I mean people, power, clean water, road, rail infrastructure, it's all there. Actually, it's just 45 minutes to the airport, so it's a day trip there and back from the capital, Santiago. So I already extolled how much I like Chile, but I can also say I've never worked on a project that is just so well situated. So that actually begs the question, if it's so well situated, how come a little junior like us were the guys to find it if we're in the land of the copper giants? It's a fair question. And so the best way I can explain it is to introduce you here to Sergio Rivera on the left. He's our VP of Exploration, and Luis Tondo on the right, our CEO. Sergio is the former general manager of exploration at Codelco, Chile and the world's largest copper producer. And he's been working in this region for over 35 years now. So let me show you what he found. If we go back to that map we were looking at earlier, but rotate it a bit and stick it into 3D, and you can still see Marimaca there in that oblong shape, and Mejillones and Antofagasta just down the valleys. You can also see some of the other mining operations in the area. What you'll notice here is that those areas are shaded in blue representing volcanic rock. And that's the rock type that typically hosts copper mineralization in this belt, due to the favorable chemical characteristics that allow it to react with the mineralizing solutions and become impregnated with the minerals. The other thing you'll notice on color shading, though, is that Marimaca there is shaded brown, and that represents intrusive rocks. The conventional wisdom, until Sergio cracked this, was that intrusives do not contain copper oxide mineralization. However, due to a series of unique geological events, which resulted in extensive fracturing, Marimaca is an exception to this rule. The geologists here will have noticed on the previous photo when the guys were looking at all that fracturing on the maps. Actually, the intensity of fracturing at Marimaca is so great that it formed a network of conducts that made the rock so permeable that mineral solutions came up and impregnated the rock with primary sulfide solutions. These are what contain the really rich copper chalcopyrite and pyrite. Those settled in the rocks, and then over periods of oxidization have formed what is the Marimaca copper oxide deposit. Sergio actually likes to tell the story a couple of months after he made the discovery and told the world about his new interpretation. He was blessed with a 1 in 100-year rainfall event. What that did was wash away all the Atacama dust and revealed all the sides of Marimaca and the mountain to be green. Anyway, back to the maps. If we take that oblong I was talking about, rotate it back into 2-dimension, and here we have the Marimaca project. If you take the whole map there, that's the district, but we're focused particularly on the squares there. 8 surface areas, but essentially 1 resource and hopefully just 1 pit. The original discovery I'm highlighting green, that was in the Marimaca 1, 2, 3 area, and there we've already established a resource, 48 million tons measured and indicated to Canadian standards, an extra 11 if you add an inferred. We've actually also completed a DFS there. But the focus really now is on growing that resource. So last year, we raised $35 million US, and the funds from that were used to acquire additional ground in and around Marimaca, and that consolidates our ownership of this region. We've also used $12 million from that fundraising to fund exploration in what we call Phase 2. The objective there to define a single resource combined with the Phase 1. We're also going to do some exploration in the north and the south, and that'll be initial work so that we can come back for a Phase 3, and then eventually what we anticipate is a single resource for a single open pit, extending something in the order of 6 kilometers top to bottom, 1 to 2 kilometers across. Okay, let me try and wrap all that up and explain why I think it's an interesting investment. First of all, Marimaca is clearly unique. An open pitable copper oxide project close to Antofagasta in the north of Chile. So that gives you the right commodity, the right stage of development, in the right location. And to an extent largely de-risked. We've made the discovery, we've established an initial resource, we're funded to take us through to Phase 2. The second point is team. I already mentioned that Sergio is one of the best exploration geologists. He's one of a few that we have and part of a wider technical and commercial team, which is supported by a strong board and 2 private equity backers at the vanguard of mining investment. Actually, the second only bought into the story last year, which is a real endorsement for the progress we're making at Marimaca. And finally, why is now perhaps a good time to invest? Well, I think whilst the trade wars go on and they bring volatility to markets and certainly to the copper price, the supply deficit remains certain. And thinking back to trade wars, if we have a positive outcome, well, that's going to be good for copper demand, good for the price. If we have a negative, well, the fallback is we will have a monster Chinese infrastructure stimulus, also good for copper, also good for the copper price. Who's going to benefit? Well, the copper traders, the big diversified miners, they'll benefit somewhat. The pure play copper producers, they'll benefit even more. However, it's the exploration companies that are proving robust and viable projects like Marimaca that the industry so desperately needs and that are more leveraged to an uptick in the copper price that will benefit the most, and also going into the M&A cycle. And I think Marimaca and Coro is possibly one of the best placed in that. Thank you.